so we can get prepared for potentially another year of more advanced learning.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Is your whole syllabus somewhere posted or is it coming?
It's coming. Mm-hmm.
Cool. I
Just
can't wait to see it.
me too. So yay.
I've been
Yes.
so heads down in my own event and the
Yes.
marketing of that. So I look up once in a while.
I know, to peek out. I totally get it. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Eat and Greet, where hopefully in this next hour, we're going to give you something that is worth the time you took to show up. And I definitely think that we're going to, because not only are we going to talk about the Saturn square Uranus, which, yes, we've heard about it, talked about it, but this is a bigger picture. And I don't think I could have found a more, first of all, excited about the topic person. But somebody who has just a real knowledge to track us forward and back to get a big view of that this is not just one singular event. So Sarrah Christensen is in our cyber house. So welcome so much to you.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
This is exciting because we met on the internet, which is very Uranian.
Yes.
Right? Do you remember those times where like you would say, "Oh, I met this person on the internet," and people are like, "Oh my God, you're going to get chopped up." And I'm like, I've met basically like everyone on the internet right now.
More and more lately, yes.
More and more. You're right. So, oh my gosh, I'm really grateful that you're here. I'm looking forward to diving into our topic today, because I do think that it's a good one. And I think when we can expand and have a fuller picture of what we're looking at, it helps it make sense. So it's not like, oh yeah, you're gonna feel these energies for 16 days and then it'll move on, but to understand we're in the cycles that we always talk about.
Yes. Yes. Very big cycle.
I know. Well, because it's not like really, I mean, in the scheme of the personal planets, these two are not running around the zodiac at warp speed, right? It's certainly not Uranus. He's like, well, I got about a 7-year timestamp on this, friends, you know?
Yes.
So we do get into that big cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. All right, you guys, a little bit of housekeeping before we jump in here. So classes for the Stormy Grace YouTube Academy are going to be kicking off on the 22nd, and we are really very excited. The syllabus is just almost done, and then we will show you the pathway that we're going to take for the next 12 months, getting us into more advanced content for 2022, hopefully. So look for details coming about that, and there will also be stuff going out in the newsletter as well. And don't forget, you can still get signed up for your spring equinox sessions. That should be in the description box down below, okay? All right, Miss Sarrah, now I ask everybody when they come, I got to know, I'm just nosy, but like, how did you get into astrology? I cannot imagine you were just sitting around and you're like, oh, I should do this.
No, I was in, well, first I was in corporate America for a very long time, still have a day job in doing that. Been a tech recruiter for over 24, 25 years, I think. Yikes. Anyway, it pays the bills. And I had my daughter in 2006, and it kind of slowed down a little bit what I was doing in the corporate every day. And in the first year after she was born, started having lots of dreams. And those dreams were kind of preparing for something that I couldn't see. But essentially, it was the breakout of kind of the breaking through of my past. And kind of, I had dreams about picking up an astrology book and psychic awareness. I had my very first Reiki session in 2009. And then it's like, oh, that's what this is. It kind of led me back to it. So yeah, dove in, feet in hands, head first, everything. And just became obsessed with it. It was like, what is this? Because I didn't even know my rising sign in 2010. But a series of synchronicities at work, of all places, led me into that further. And by 2013, I was practicing part-time. And since then, been practicing. So here I am.
And so which branch of astrology did you or have you currently found yourself in?
Sure. I started out with modern Western astrology, bought a couple of books, but one of my dreams was all about Pluto. Didn't understand it at all. and I purchased Jeffrey Wolf Green's first book, didn't understand it at all, and eventually landed on Stephen Forrest's material. And then I was looking for a teacher that I had accessibility to, and so he became my target teacher.
Beautiful.
So that's how I am. So yay. So
We're
I've been,
foresties.
yes, I'm a forest. Foresty.
I know we should like never coin that term because he's probably going to think it's terrible. Stephen, I'm sorry. We won't say that. That's beautiful. So as we listen to what you're going to share with us, we really know that it's kind of coming through that evolutionary lens, which I think, anyways, in and of itself lends itself to not just the information, but also the point of development where we can see what's in there and then say, okay, these are the things, and then do some growth with it.
Yes. Though my presentation looks at something from a bigger cycle perspective, and I would think that it might be fascinating to people who are interested in mundane astrology as well, because I look at it from, we are individuals in the bigger scheme of things. So there's a macro and a micro perspective. And I tend to look at, let's look at the big picture and then step back and go, where am I in that mix? And that's kind of how I look at it when I do presentations like this as well.
Brilliant. Well, I'm pumped to hear all about what you have to say. And we have successfully made it past our first Saturn Uranus square. So of 2021, we have successfully made it through. My hair's not on fire, which I feel very good about, but ultimately it's interesting because I don't know about your experience, but I'm also an astrologer though. So being aware of what was happening cyclically, I can tell you around the time of the square, there were these things that they were kind of hanging out there, or they were kind of in the, are these going to stay, that kind of zone of uncertainty. And I tell you, when it happened and then the days that followed, it was like, it almost felt like chipping away, like they were nicely chipped away under that square. But what they did require was my effort to release them.
Yes.
Yeah. Like it was not the universe is like, oh, I'll just take that from you. It was like, no, get off your hiney, lady. Say no to that. You don't have time for that. Like it was very,
yes.
It was very effort.
There's a sharpness to it that, you're choosing, but you're also, it's kind of like going through the University of Hard Knocks of life, and what am I good at? What's been going on, and where I still want to focus, but where do I need to sharpen my skill set or whatever, all of these. And, and the square with Uranus is kind of these unexpected, I got to deal with this kind of in the mix at the same time. So,
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Cause there was one that came out of not nowhere. I was aware, but I was like, oh, okay, it's you. Oh, it's okay. All right. This is the thing. You know what I mean? So brilliant.
Yes. And personally, just to kind of tie in a little story, I know I like personal stories in astrology. I have a day job, and so it's a lot of work. And the week that it was becoming exact, that day, I heard an announcement at my job that my peer was not doing so well, and within 48 hours, basically, end of story for that person. So it's kind of like, oh goodness. And so immediately then I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm going to get all this work, extra work on top of what I was doing before, and having to migrate data and things like that, which were really significant. I'm like, oh goodness, this square. It's just like that. You just have these unexpected things that you have some foresight, but not fully, right? So you just don't know how it's going to land.
Yeah. Absolutely. So when we look at this kind of in a collective sense, before you jump in here, what's your big sense or your big perspective on this for the world right now?
On the square itself, it's a full cycle. And I hope that what I share today is looking at it through a bigger lens and realizing that we're in the end square, we're in the closing square. And that's so important to understand that cyclical piece of it, and what was the seed of the the beginnings of this, and then how it's maturing us and what we're having to break through, or what's been accelerated for us. And that's all in this sharing. And you'll get a sense as I share the headlines, the storylines that bring us through the cycle. So you can see that.
Brilliant. All right. Well, I'm ready. I mean, I was laughing with you a little before because I always see other people's PowerPoints and I'm like, oh my God, this is so magical. Literally something's about to happen. And I do PowerPoints and I'm always like, I don't know, isn't that cool? It zooms in. Isn't that neat? Like it's never this experience when I look at other people's.
Yeah, same. I have the same thing. All right, so we are going to dive right in because I'm going to move very quickly through some of this and interject as you feel. Hopefully I can answer your questions as we go.
Okay.
Okay, and if we can get this thing to work. There we go. So I always like to start off with a little bit of perspective, with a little bit of poetry from Rumi. The moment you accept what troubles you've been given, the door will open. I just love that.
Oh man. Yeah.
So here we go. Okay, so I start off with a perspective of just Saturn entering into Aquarius, then it's beginning the, kind of moving toward that square. Just a real quick snapshot of that last year, and the Saturn re-entering Aquarius around December 17th, 2020, and then December 22nd, Saturn and Jupiter coming together in the conjunction. This is very important because of that bigger cycle with that in air. But I want to kind of look at that. Let me move this out of the way so I can see what I'm doing. There we go. So, and then Saturn leaves Aquarius and enters Pisces in March 7th, 2023. So I want to give a perspective of this period of time that it's in Aquarius, and that you have an idea of kind of an end date of when it enters into Pisces in the back of your mind. So March 7th, a few years out, so 2 years away. So, okay, so for those who are just beginning, I like to always share the symbols. We have Saturn and we have Uranus here in the symbols. And here are the dates of the exact squares between these two planets. February 17th, which we just landed on, 14 some days ago or so, 2 weeks ago. And then June 14th is the coming next square that when it's exact again, and it'll be at 13 degrees and 7 minutes of Aquarius and Taurus. And that is when it's in the retrograde. And then December 24th, 2021, they will meet again one more time in the exact at 11 degrees and 6 minutes of Aquarius and Taurus. So pretty much throughout the year, and then it will start moving away in 2022.
So we've got a minute with this.
Yeah. So it's like, don't hold your breath. You might want to breathe.
But whenever we have a transit, as they dance throughout the year, what I find, and I'm just curious if you do too, that it's like we have that initial hit that happens. And so you see the pieces, and then another one comes, and then we have this last one that we'll have in December. Do you find that it is usually a continuation of whatever the first one was? I
Yes.
tend to find that.
Yes. So like if there's something that happens at the first square, so like a specific event, there could be that there's another thing that happens in the next one that's tied in the same themes, because the Saturn and the Saturn and the Uranus are hitting a particular, or inside a particular house, and for your individual chart. And so it's probably refreshing on something within the themes. Could be same people, same situation. Like mine is centered in my work, it looks like, but there's also my astrology business kind of stuff has some things going on as well. So I see that kind of maturing and what else will happen with that. But definitely there's a singular event that you might look at and say, oh, that's pretty powerful, and how that may change up again at the second square and then again at the third and final.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
So what I think helps in looking at any kind of square is understanding what square is it, the beginning square, the waxing square, or the waning square. It's always important to remember when you are in a particular cycle with a pair of planets. So you can do this with any pair of planets, but we're looking at Saturn and Uranus today. And I like to look at what was in the last cycle. So here are just a real quick snapshot that you can add to your studies about what was the last cycle with Saturn and Uranus squaring. And so we're looking at February 6, 1991, and that was when the first entered Pisces, and then January 28th, 1994, leaves Aquarius until 2020. And then May 17th, 1991, stations retrograde at 6 degrees of Aquarius, but did not re-enter Capricorn in 1991. Sometimes when it retrograde, it goes from the one sign to the one it was before and comes back over. But in this particular retrograde, it did not. It went right up to the edge, stayed in Aquarius, and then went forward. So that's kind of interesting to think about in this cycle. October 5th of 1991, it was stationed direct at 0 degrees Aquarius, 11 minutes. And then May 28th, 1992, stations retrograde at 18 degrees of Aquarius, 29 minutes. And then October 16th, 1992, station direct at 11 degrees of Aquarius, which interesting is that Mercury retrograde that sat on the 11 degrees of Aquarius. So, and in the end here, it's like in the Pisces, it was May 21st, 1993, stations retrograde 0 degrees Pisces, re-enters Aquarius at June 30th, 1993, and then October 28th, 1993, stations direct at 23 Aquarius, and then finally made its exit out of Aquarius January 28th, 1994. The reason I give this kind of short list like this is like what was going on back then. You know, you want to look at what was going on and where was the seed of the moment of the beginning. Well, the beginning was February 12th of 1988. And a lot of people, you look at the degree that it began, and that's 29 degrees. It's the critical degrees of Sagittarius. And then consider from this whole perspective, what's going on in this particular cycle with Saturn and Uranus. So then it'll move through the first square, and then it'll go to the opposition, and then now we're in the closing square. So here's the dates for the waxing square. I'm not going to go through each date here, but you can look at them, basically 99, 2000. But we are now in the waning square, and you can see the current crisis around the travel industry, higher education restrictions, the schools closed, physically closed, social distancing, the new mandates, the new rules, and distribution and supply issues, all the things that we've been experiencing. But as it's closed in, because a lot of these themes were opening up in 2020 because of the Saturn entering into the Aquarius with the Uranus, but it wasn't exact yet. It was kind of finishing off from the full opposition and then closing into the square. So this square we are now in is the waning square. And what is the waning square about? The waning square is about reorientation. That's my key word here, is reorientation. I kind of look at it from what happened 32 years ago, 1988, when that was going on. And I kind of take a snapshot of world events. I look at Wikipedia, look at the news headlines. We had the Winter Olympics in Calgary, Canada. That's the beginning of the cycle. There was a big bank robbery. And that's the Taurus, the Uranus, interesting, kind of in that archetypal image. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1988. Look at that. That's huge. So huge. What is that in this whole cycle? What is that telling us about people? And then the Iran-Iraq war ends, but there was millions of lives lost. 1988. George H.W. Bush, so George Bush Sr. was president of the United States in November of 88. So that's at the beginning of the cycle. And then the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and it became an independent state. So it's proclaimed by a vote. Huge, again, kind of that Uranian thing of freedom and people and liberation. Benazir Bhutto, I hope I said her name correctly, sworn in as the Prime Minister of Pakistan, first woman head of the government of an Islam dominated state. That was pretty significant when we think of women and authority figures. Excuse me. But I also love kind of the symbolic of just Uranian themes of first transatlantic telephone cable to use optical fibers is completed at the end of 1988. So that's the beginning of this, kind of the opening of the communication. And so now we're in the waning square. But before we get to what's current right now, let's keep looking at what was going on in history to kind of get a snapshot here. So in 99 and 2000, these dates were for the first square. So Napster, I don't know if anybody remembers Napster, the music download service.
Man, I was like, uh-oh, this is like illegal, turns out. Yeah, I was like, uh-oh.
Right. I mean, just to think of how maverick that was, right? Very Uranian in what it was doing. There was a peace treaty signed for the Kosovo War in Yugoslavia with NATO. Italy was awarded the 2006 Winter Olympics, so they would build up to that. I remember still an image of in my memory of the American women's soccer player Brandy Chastain, scores the game-winning penalty kick against China in the final of the FIFA Women's World Cup. What's interesting is how much FIFA has gone through a lot recently in the last few years with other sports organizations. So that's kind of interesting that's going on in this cycle. July 16th, John F. Kennedy Jr. dies. That was pretty significant from what I think of the collective in the United States of America, how there's a projection on that family and how we look at figures and their position and family and things like that. Then also the Liberty Bell 7, piloted by Gus Grissom, is raised from the Atlantic Ocean. So, and that's really interesting. And then NASA loses one of its probes, the Mars Climate Orbiter. And look what's happening right now on Mars.
I know. Oh my God.
So it's like, wow, look at that, right? So I just find when I bring out these news stories that are happening when those squares are happening, it's like, what is going on here? This acceleration of things. December 3rd, I think that year, there was Tori Murden became the first woman to cross the Atlantic Ocean by rowboat alone when she reached Guadalupe from the Canary Islands. And my husband, and I don't remember her name, but there was a recent woman, very young, I think the youngest ever, who came across the Atlantic solo, just like in the last month.
Wow.
And I will have to look up her name, but so it's interesting because that was happening at this closing square, another one, but this time it was the youngest person. I thought, wow, isn't that interesting to come in the mix. And then around May 5th of 2000, after originating in the Philippines, the I Love You computer virus spreads quickly throughout the world. This is interesting because even though it's spreading through the computers, it's still kind of the I'm vulnerable idea in the consciousness, And then, of course, a disaster, a fireworks factory disaster, which is interesting because of the beginning of the cycle. It was Uranus and Saturn in Sag. So there's that fire element. And I was just like, wow, that's pretty powerful. So that's so interesting.
It is. It's always interesting when you see exactly what you said, like what was happening. And then we get these themes where people are stimulated in the same way to do some of these, take some of these same actions. I always think that's really neat.
Yeah. And I mean, there's other pieces of history that we can weave into this story, when we go back in time, like to 2000, like 1 year later, we're dealing with 9/11, in the United States. And then what did that do for the entire, airline industry and how controls were put in place and things like that. And it's also another thing about vulnerability. It's kind of interesting how it kind of weaves in the storyline of these two and this cycle. So And then at the peak full phase, this is when the two are opposite each other. Now at the end of this, I have slides of the actual charts, so we can look at that a little bit closely. Here's just the information. But in November of 08, February 5th of 09, and September 15th of 09 is when we're at the peak full phase, when Saturn and Uranus. So Bitcoin is published November 1st. Isn't that huge? And what's going on right now?
Oh, yeah.
And then the first, Barack Obama is elected president as the first African American to be elected to the presidency. Huge in just the collective, acknowledging that. It was such an emotional moment. I remember that still. And then that was such a big moment because it's happening at the peak. This is like the fullness of it, right? And so it kind of gives me like what's to come with that, right? So there's the peak and it's still going through that process. And then November 19th, we have Claudia Castillo of Spain became the first person to have a successful trachea transplant. And I think about the trachea, I think about first it's the engineering of it, the biochemical engineering that goes through in a transplant. And it's on the trachea, which is kind of the throat. And I think of Uranus, even though at the time, I don't believe that Uranus was in Taurus at that moment because it's at the peak moment. We'll see the chart here in a minute. But I think that's interesting. What else is coming from the biosciences from that first, right?
Right.
At that peak moment. And then here's the big golden nugget, I guess, in the peak moment that is kind of like, wow, look at that, is the outbreak of H1N1 influenza strain, the swine flu. And I remember that. I got it with my daughter. And it was no fun. And it was deemed a global pandemic, but it's almost like so minor compared to what we're dealing with now, right? So it's kind of like, what was the preparatory, and here we are at the closing square with coronavirus. So July 09, also the longest solar eclipse of the 21st century at that point, that was lasting, I think that lasted 6 minutes and 38 seconds or so, but it was over parts of Asia and the Pacific Ocean. And we've had a fairly recent one in the United States, which we have all been experiencing since, what was that, 17 or 18? That was 18, I think.
A little bit, just for a
just
short
a little,
time.
just a smidge.
A short time.
Yes. So kind of looking at the history of the Saturn and Aquarius square Uranus, there's the fear of change. There's a caution around reform. There's breaking with tradition, breaks with authority. That's the Uranian impulse. Unexpected breaks. I kind of put both there. And surprising disruptions. We've experienced all of these. Rebels topple the old paradigm. I mean, look at Myanmar. I can't say that correctly. That recent coup. So that's happening at this closing square. There's others around the world that we can take a look at during this cycle, but it's accelerated reform. So a recent Saturn-Uranus conjunction in CAP 1987, when Mikhail Gorbachev led the major reform of the then CSSR. Saturn-Uranus also, it was like the old things resurfaced to be reviewed again and old ideas looked at in a new way. So that's kind of interesting to take into perspective at the beginning before this switch up was happening with these two in this cycle. Astrologer Charles Carter describes the Saturn and Uranus as being democratic in spirit and autocratic in method. And this combination has long been associated with inflexibility and tyrannical and dictatorial. That's a tongue twister.
That's a good one. That's a good one, man, for Tuesday. Come on.
So little things to think about. Georgia Strathis is an astrologer. I sat in her lectures in Norwalk 2 years ago, I think. forgetting time now. It's so weird now. But she has a great book called Pushing Through Time. Love her work. And this is from her, so you understand where it comes from. It's basically talking about the last quarter phase, Saturn and Uranus. And it may be the most challenging, as one cannot go back to change what was created, and the future is not yet known. So it is 75%, way through the cycle. We still have 25% left to finish. And this portion of the phase is refiguring, rethinking an idea, the information, what was created, and how it was received, accepted, or experienced. Preparing for the upcoming cycle takes place in the last quarter phase. So I kind of love that sentence, because it's like plan, plan, plan. What you know now, you won't know everything. You never will. So it's about planning what you would like to do based on the trends that you can have a picture of now. How are things changing, and what do you want to do? That's your Mars and your Saturn. What are you going to do about it? And Mars is the work to do it. This is a time of psychological darkness, as she wrote in her book. So it's kind of interesting. It's like, yeah, it's like dealing with what I don't know and acknowledging what I don't know, and then realizing okay, what can I do with what I do know? It's kind of empowering once you figure out what you're capable of, and can kind of make a plan and shoot for something and have a dream. I mean, we live based on that, right? A lot of us do. Some people just stay in the present moment, but some of us have some Capricorn energy, and we use it to make plans and go for things. There can be kind of the gut level checks if we're heading in the right direction for what is intended. So there's always that. There's subtle hints. I think if we're listening to our inner self in a daily practice, or at least a weekly practice, or that's important to hear and feel, what is the right path for me, and directing yourself in that way. And I think astrology is a fantastic tool to have a bigger picture of how things are arcing, how are things progressing in your chart, where's the Saturn going for you, and where is your natal Saturn. So these are all important, because we can work the planets out to Saturn. Beyond that, they are working us and what we're having to navigate with change. And that's important to think about. And I love the keyword as reorientation.
Well, I don't know about you, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's 1,000% what it feels like on this planet, just to be where it's like, okay, well, we're reorienting to all of these different things that have been, but now we're aware of them in a different way. And I do agree. I think if there's not like a consistent practice of being able to kind of tap in at that gut check level, we miss it.
Yeah. So it's really an important time. I mean, I'm a person who I keep a journal. I've been keeping a journal since I was 12, something like that. Now, I'm not like every day or anything, but I pretty consistently am writing in my journal, dreams, whatnot, goals, dreams, letting things go, whatever. It's in my journal. And I just think it's a good time to kind of take inventory and think about where I'm going. And I like to share that, because maybe it encourages others to do the same thing.
Absolutely.
Continuing on about just the archetypal forces at play here, how is Aquarius different than Capricorn? Because Saturn is one of the co-rulers. In a modern sense, we look at Saturn and Uranus as the ruler of Aquarius. So that's kind of in the mix here. And Saturn being in its own sign from that regard, Saturn rules both. And so of Capricorn and Aquarius. So we have fixed air versus fixed earth of Taurus, kind of in the mixed here. And so Saturn focuses the attention to our responsibility, our discipline, our collective efforts in the humanitarian sign of Aquarius, group think, and how we're collectively working together for the greater good. The simple task of being asked to wear a mask is a part of this. And it's forcing some of us to realize, oh, it's not just me, I'm in a community, and to consider everyone, that's a part of that's happened. And and still is happening where I live. It's a mandate for public places. So, managing through our fears on the disruptive and the volatility of the Uranus on otherwise what we think is stable. I like to think of Taurus as rather stable, but right now it's getting the change up. Money, income, resources, what we consider valuable for survival, just that simple survival. When at the same time we're getting new ideas, there's new solutions coming in to problems that are innovative, the innovation of those and the benefits for the whole, the vaccinations. People have their opinions on them, but they are happening at a faster rate than they ever have in history. This is important. There's acceleration kind of happening also if you look about what we've got going on with the Mars thing. And so there's a lot that's kind of moving quite quickly and other things that seem like they're going slower. The pressure is the square, and it acts and feels like Mars. So it pokes at you, it disrupts you, when you're in your flow, and a little bit destructive can be, and it makes you choose. So it's like, what do I want? Makes you choose.
Yeah. Mars gets very specific about your desires, right? I just feel like work your Mars, go talk to Mars, because you'll know what you want when you talk to Mars. Right.
Yes.
He's very specific. It's like, but I don't want that. That's the nice nature of a direct Mars, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it's like, I don't really like to go in a lot of different directions. This is my jam.
And some people have to try it on because their Mars might not be as visible to them where it is in their chart and how visible it is to their first house. That's really important to keep in mind. Sometimes you have to try it out and go, no, I don't like that.
Yeah, you can find out a lot by finding out what it's not.
That's right. That's right. So this is the recent headlines, and just a couple of weeks ago, February 17th, and we can see some of the larger themes that we're hitting at the moment that the square is happening around the climate change detail that we're looking at, in the power grids that we're definitely having issues in Texas and in other places, not just Texas. And just around the world, we're looking at kind of different things that are kind of happening at that square moment. Another big one that was happening around the world in Australia was the bans for Facebook on Australian users looking for news and things like that. So that's very interesting. And at the very end, I have the Facebook chart that popped up on social media recently by Deborah Holding, which I'm so glad she shared, and disasters and accidents that were kind of really big happening that week through the storms that hit the United States and other places. But definitely a lot of having to deal with hard and the coldness of the Saturn Aquarius kind of thing. So that's the beginning of the square. So I think the power grid scenario that hit recently will be a part of the theme of how do we look at how the power grids are. This is going to be definitely, it's going to be a theme that's looked at on a more macro scale from the United States, I think, and how each state is doing it. So it's, they'll be looking for solutions that are less vulnerable for the people. So I think that's happening. Here's just a quick slide on comparison between Saturn and Cap and Saturn and Aquarius. I like to, because I know a lot when I in the beginning, when I was first starting on astrology, it's like, they're so close. I mean, but yet there's a real difference between the fixed sign, the air sign of Aquarius, and Cap being cardinal and Earth, and how that kind of plays out from the tradition of the Capricorn to a forward-thinking, a genius in Aquarius, and the Senex and the elder in the Capricorn, and the fringe kind of individual in the Aquarius, and then going through the rest of them here. But just want to quickly go through. I don't know how much time we have, but
we're doing all right so far.
Okay, so here is the chart of the ingress of Saturn into Aquarius, just to point it out as it's applying to the Uranus was at 4 degrees of Taurus in 38 minutes. What's nice about an ingress chart, which I wanted just to kind of add in here, is that within the ingress chart of a planet like Saturn or a planet like Jupiter, I think it's pretty powerful to look at what are the themes that are happening with that ingress. And so I wanted to point that out because this is the first entry of Saturn into the sign of Aquarius since the last time it was in Aquarius. And where are the other planets in the display of the chart and what's going on with that? So you can kind of take a look at that. And I have these all set to Washington, D.C., just to kind of give it from the Eastern perspective, Eastern Daylight Time. So there's a lot going on the Capricorn at the same time, and we haven't quite got to the square yet in this chart, but you can see kind of themes of what's going to happen. To me, this is like, gives me a little bit of a storyline of what's going to be the themes that may be playing out for the rest of the time that Saturn is in Aquarius for the 3 years, right?
Yeah.
Here is the chart of the Saturn and Uranus at the beginning of the cycle in February of 1988. You see the 29 degrees of Sag right down here at 29:55. But what's also interesting is look at those Mars and the moon are right there with it. And that to me is pretty stunning in terms of the, you know, the freedom, the drive for freedom. That's the Mars who wants to be free, and the same thing with the moon and how that's a driving thing. And yet we're in a period of time. It's like the freedom's a little bit contained right now as we consider a bigger picture. And here is the Saturn and Uranus first square in 99. And so kind of back in time, this shows, here's the Saturn in Taurus and the Uranus is in Aquarius. So they're flipped by sign at the first square. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'm like, and I kind of, as a student of astrology, I would be like, well, why, you know, I'd want to look at the cycles. Does that always happen like that, where they flip between the squares? So
it brings up your astrologer wife, right? It's
yeah, like, so that kind of made me go, So I think that's interesting to take a look at, because the Saturn in the Taurus has the you know, the earthy quality and the steadiness, but then the Uranian thing is coming in. And if you think about 99.com, that was the period of the .coms just blowing up in the online space. Businesses were kind of taking off with that. And this was before social media. So this is interesting to take a look at from that perspective. And then Saturn and Uranus in 08, we see the full phase peak. This is the first one. And this is important because of kind of brings to light the big things that were going to, that were in the seed, that were going to bloom. But then as it fades out and goes towards where we are now, that was the fullness of it, but things are being reoriented. Reoriented is such a key word for this final square, because that was what was put into motion collectively on a big picture. If you think about the events that I discussed on the full phase slide, and think about now we're at reorientation. What have we learned? We can't change what happened in that cycle. All we can do is respond to where we are in this moment. And then you start planting the seeds, but you have zero clue of what the new is going to be and how that comes into reorient to what is. And a lot of the things about what is in this particular cycle is that especially in America, I would say in the United States of America, we are realizing how far we've come and yet how far we have yet to heal in certain areas of our collective diversity of who we are as a people. That's so important. If we're going to go beyond in the next one, we have to understand exactly where we are. And I think that's important. And what we do with it about it in our education and our businesses and everything. And then also the reorientation of how we use technology. We have gone through the .coms to social media, and now social media is on the hot seat, and how we operate with it and what it does in our election cycles. So there's so much. See, the reorientation, it's such these big themes. And then what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do with it? And all we can do is start framing what that looks like. And that goes into our politics, who we vote for, why we vote for them, and what they do for us. So there is that. So, so here's the Uranus in the Pisces and the Saturn in the Virgo on the full cycle. And then 2020.
2020, here we are.
December 21st was the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, the beginning. And that has its own cycle, but it's important to note because that is part of it's part of this cycle. So it's kind of, there's cycles within cycles within cycles in astrology. So you kind of look at all of them and kind of like, oh, okay.
I know I did have somebody like leave a comment one time and I had said something about, a closing cycle. They were like, are we ever not in a cycle? I'm like, no.
You're always in a cycle.
The thing. Like you're in a cycle somewhere.
Yep. Always in a cycle. It just is like, where is your focus? And at the individual level, I like to look at it like you can look at your solar return, or you can use traditional astrology and look at annual perfection, kind of figure out there's big things and there's what you may be focusing in a particular year, and bite-sized chunks. So and this was the first square, the first closing square, February 17th. So we can see this heavy stellium here in the Aquarius at that moment. It's just profound. And then there's also 4, well, if you include Black Moon Lilith here, 3 if you don't, in Taurus. So it's really, what a dynamic square. It's fascinating. How much is there and how much is our reorientation towards technology, towards our understanding ourselves within the collective, how we are with our neighbor, with our, how we are as an individual. Who are we as an individual? Who are we with conditioning within ourselves, So all of these things are a part of this. So.
Yeah. And it's a really interesting, I think, reorienting when we look at like the tech piece and how that just fits into average everyday life. It's like before, you needed to be the person with like some brawn and some body to go out and like do the stuff and hunt and gather and bring the things back. And now, especially in the time of Aquarius, it's like, well, do you have the competency and the intellect? It's really made that shift out of being just all in the body and, are you the biggest person in the room who can do the job, to the intellect, right? Like we've moved into that tech space where it's like, well, it's great, you can bench press all of this, but what about this? So that's an interesting, that is interesting for humans, I think, just in general. Yeah.
It is also, I think, if you look at technology and how we use it in relation to the body, there are, I think, positive things, but there's always the shadow in anything. It's like, how do we look at how we use technology with DNA? It's great for solving crimes and things like that, but there's a difficult, or was it Stacy something? I can't remember her name. She did a presentation at NORWAC a while ago, 2 years ago, and she talked about how the more and more women, when they're giving birth, are doing C-sections and they're timing the birth, and so how that changes the dynamic of the collective experience of how many are born during the day versus how many born at night, because a lot of those surgeries are elected in the morning. So it becomes a 12th house thing, a 12th house sun and 11th house, so it's an interesting dynamic. It's like, wow. And how that comes into the mix. And I can't remember Stacy's name, but she did an excellent presentation at NORWAC 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's really, I think it is just so interesting with Uranus and Taurus, how much we're learning and seeing how all of this does impact the body and impacts, I think, our ability to remember that our bodies are built to be able to withstand physical pain and things like that. So that's like 6 other eat and greets.
I know, so much. What else do I have in here? Now, this is the new cycle in 2032, which is what, 12 years away, 11 years away. It's a Jupiter cycle away, basically, when they come together in a conjunction and start a new cycle. And it's in Gemini, which is opposite of the Sag that the last one was. But this is at 28 degrees, but it's Gemini. And so I was like, this is very interesting. And where's the Mercury? The Mercury is right on the ascendant in Leo. So it's really, really visible. And so it's like, what's going on with the communication and the visibility of it? And, but then in Cancer, the sun's in Cancer. So it kind of makes me like wonder about communication and how that's looking related to our identity and how we feel, kind of like from our homes. I mean, how is that changing? So there's something else that's coming in this mix of how we communicate, how we learn. So the whole paradigm of the education makes me wonder about it.
Yeah, me too. I know. And this is the funny place of reorientation, is that it's like, yeah, I do just wonder. Like we do wonder, that's like what we've got right now.
Yes. So it kind of, you can see that like my child decided that she wanted to be homeschooled. Like she was doing the very distant learning with Zooms, and they had that like so many blocks in the Zoom, and then so many what they call asynchronous learning, where they were doing their homework by themselves kind of thing, and then back on the Zooms. But then they stacked it when they started re-entering to the physical buildings. Mm-hmm. And some kids went back, and some kids are like, I'm not going back yet. They didn't want to deal with the protocol. My child was one of them. And she was going through 6 hours of Zoom lessons on 2 days a week. And she's like, I can't do that anymore, Mom. Yeah. And so we just looked at other options that is suitable for the time. She's a really intelligent kid and learning on her own and excellent grades. I don't have a concern about that. It's just like, I wonder about how. So now our focus is, how do we keep her connected to having a group of friends? So right. She is having this social, but it's in a way that's safe for her, that she feels comfortable with. So parents are having to refigure
so much. Refigure it. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and that's all individual choices too. I have a stepson here, and he goes into the physical building because he really needs it. He did not excel in the other situation. So everything is so individual, it's an individual, like what's going on with that person. And that's very Aquarian to me.
Very Aquarian. Yeah. Individual as a piece of the whole. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm with you 1,000%, because I've got 2 kids too, and they both have very different opinions on how they'd like to learn. Yeah. Now that they know that it's an option, it's like, oh, well, I actually don't enjoy or find myself being productive being in class at 8 a.m., or, it's brought all of these possibilities for reorientation to the surface.
Yep. So, so that's going to be the next cycle, but we have to finish off this cycle, but that's the sneak peek, as they say.
Yeah. But it's neat to see the full picture, just so you can see where it's gone. And I think sometimes for me, it's neat to see that it has happened before. Like there are similar attributes in every cycle that have come along. So it's like, okay, I can reorient myself to understand these are some common things that have happened before, will happen again. And so I can just kind of pivot where I need to, instead of the fear. It's just so easy to give into fear.
Yeah, this helps deal with that a lot, I think. Yes. Yeah. You still have to answer your big questions.
Right, you still have to answer, and you still have to do the dishes and the laundry. So that's the thing. Right? Yeah. Astrology has not solved that just yet.
Oh so my gosh. I think that is wrapping up. I did add one more slide of the Facebook chart of origin, because there's so much going on with Facebook right now, and there's a huge paradigm of change with the technology. If anyone wants to add this into the mix, this is the chart, and you could have a whole nother eat and greet on this topic alone, and what's going on with social media and the relationship between Apple and Facebook and what's going on there. I think it's part of the square. It's going to be an interesting dynamic that changes our smartphone relationship to how we are in some social media. I think it's going to be interesting because of how we operate with these as well. And there's going to be a reorientation with that too.
There will be a reorientation with that. Oh, I'm just with you 1,010%. Well,
Yeah.
that you're right. That could be like, that could also be like 3 other eat and greets, which we could do in segments of 2 hours each, you know?
Yeah, it's a big one. It's a big one because there's so much going on with the current transits, but it's also what it's progressed to be, and also solar arcs and things like that, which are pretty interesting. And we can go back to that chart, but that's my end. So there you are.
Yes. And speaking of progressions, you'll be coming during the Kickstarter year to teach progressions.
Yes, I am going to be teaching progressions. Yay.
So you guys will get more of Sarrah. So hopefully you enjoyed the talk today, and then you'll get to see her in action for us this year as well, which is just very, very exciting. So very cool.
Very exciting.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming. And hopefully you guys, in this last hour we've been together, you heard something that, you know, caught your attention or made you question, and definitely is worth the time that you took to show up, and gives you an idea of the timeline a little bit. So hopefully you heard something good here today. And we look forward to seeing you in the next eat and greet that'll be coming around. We've got just so much going on around over here, and there's so many beautiful astrologers showing up who are like, I just want to help and put out good information, which I just think I'm super joyful about. So thank you so much again, Sarrah, for coming and sharing with us.
Thanks for having me. It was
Absolutely. Absolutely. And obviously we're going to have you more during the year. So we're not done just yet. All right, you guys, I love you a ton, and I look forward to seeing you in the next eat and greet. And remember, you can always check the calendar at stormygrace.com right there on the homepage. Scroll to the bottom and see who else is coming in our eat and greets, see what else is going on in the astro community, get signed up for the things that you're interested in, and all of that good jazz. And we will see you guys next time. Bye, everybody. That was so good. You just like breezed through it. You're like, in this and all of these over here, you did just fine. I have no idea why you get nervous. You did great.
I still get the nervous butterflies, but maybe that's not a bad thing.
No, I don't think so. Well, and the chat was nice. People were like, oh yeah, I remember this and I remember this. So it's always good though when the chat gets going.
Yeah, you can see the chat. I'm glad you're good with all that, keeping track of that. I know that when I'm watching a presentation, I'm always watching the chat, but when you're the one speaking, it's like, okay.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. No. And this appeals to every piece of my mercurial nature to be this busy. Oh, this is just my jam, Sarrah. It actually like brings me joy to do things like this. I'm like, oh, so many things to do.
Yeah. I have a powerful Mercury. It's out of bounds on my midheaven in Capricorn. So I get it. But I like the research too. I like to kind of dive down really deep and then come up and resurface and then share all the little nuggets. That's what I like to do. So.
Oh my God. And see, that's so funny because my Mercury is out of bounds at the midheaven, but it opposes Uranus. And it also is quincunx.
Square Uranus. We have similar stuff.
Yes. And it's so funny because I'm like, I'll go get all of the deep information. I'm like, that's very good. Let me find somebody to talk about that and I'll facilitate it. I don't necessarily love the putting it back out there portion. I'm like, so it's just good. Well, I will. Okay. So on this is already